All right, let's dive in, shall we? Today we're tackling a topic I think we can all relate to: happiness.
Who doesn't love a good dose of happiness, right?
Exactly. And to guide our deep dive, we're turning to a classic, The Art of Happiness, by the Dalai Lama and psychiatrist Howard C. Cutler.
A fascinating pairing for sure. Spiritual wisdom meets Western medicine, trying to unravel this thing called happiness.
Right. This book's been a bestseller for, over 2 decades now?
Over 2 decades, yep. Which actually makes our deep dive even more interesting, don't you think?
Totally. It's like, how do the book's teachings hold up against everything we've learned about happiness since then?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
A lot has happened in the world of psychology and neuroscience since this book came out.
Exactly. So we're not just going to recap the book. We're going to put it to the test, see if it's still got that happiness magic.
The book makes some pretty bold claims, too. Like, right off the bat, it says happiness isn't just some lucky draw. You can actually train your mind to be happier.
Okay, I got to admit, when I first read that, I was intrigued. Like, the Dalai Lama's involved, sign me up. But also, a little part of me was like, really? Can we actually control our happiness that much?
Yeah, it's healthy to be a little skeptical. I mean, there's definitely this thing called a happiness set point, right? Kind of like your weight, but for your mood. Some people just naturally tend to be more optimistic, while others might gravitate towards, well, not so happy thoughts.
True. But the authors do acknowledge this set point idea. They just don't think we're stuck with it forever. They argue that we can actually shift that set point over time.
That's a hopeful thought, for sure, because let's face it, life throws curveballs, right? And it's easy to fall into the trap of comparison, always looking at what everyone else has, and feeling like we're not quite measuring up.
Oh, tell me about it. It's like that old H.L. Mencken quote. A wealthy man is one whose income is $100 a year higher than his wife's sister's husband.
Right. You're constantly chasing a moving target.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's even more intense in the age of social media, right? Everyone's curating their perfect online lives, and it's easy to get sucked into that vortex of not enough.
Totally. It's like this constant bombardment of better and newer and shinier. It's exhausting. But here's what I find really interesting about The Art of Happiness. It doesn't just focus on those external factors, the stuff we think will make us happy. It goes deeper, much deeper.
Okay, so walk me through this. How do we go from wanting more stuff to actually cultivating genuine happiness from within?
Well, the book takes a really unique approach. Almost like a doctor diagnosing an illness, it pinpoints the root causes of our unhappiness. And it calls them, wait for it, the 3 poisons.
The 3 poisons. Okay, before we lose everyone who isn't into, ancient Eastern philosophy, how does the book make this whole poison thing relatable?
I know, right? Sounds a bit intense, but it's actually quite grounded when you break it down. These poisons aren't some mystical forces. They're actually very human struggles, things we all grapple with in our own ways.
Okay, I'm listening. What's poison number 1?
Poison number 1 is ignorance.
Ignorance, huh? So are we talking about, not knowing enough facts, not being well read?
Not quite. It's less about lacking knowledge and more about misunderstanding. Misunderstanding our own true nature, how the world actually works, and the things that lead to genuine, lasting happiness.
Okay, so it's more about those false assumptions we often carry around about ourselves, others, the whole shebang.
Exactly. Those limiting beliefs that keep us stuck, And then we have poison number 2, craving.
Craving. Oh, man, this one hits close to home, doesn't it? We live in a culture obsessed with more.
It's everywhere you look. More money, more stuff, more followers, more likes.
It's like this never-ending cycle of I'll be happy when.
Exactly. And the authors argue that this constant craving actually sets us up for disappointment.
Because there's always going to be something else to chase, right?
Exactly. It's like trying to fill a bottomless pit. There's always going to be another shiny object, another goalpost to reach.
And the book actually shares this really interesting story about a woman who wins the lottery.
Right, yeah, I remember that one. She's ecstatic at first, right? Like, who wouldn't be? But then that feeling fades.
It's like no matter how much we get, it's never enough to truly satisfy that craving.
Which brings us to poison number 3.
Hatred.
Hatred. Man, that's a heavy one. I get wanting more stuff, maybe even being a little ignorant about things, but hatred, that just seems like, a recipe for more unhappiness. Right, like how can hatred ever be good for you? And the book doesn't beat around the bush on this one. It straight up says hatred is always destructive. But here's where things get interesting. The antidote the book offers isn't about just suppressing those feelings, like trying to shove them down and pretend they don't exist. It's about cultivating the opposite. Compassion.
Compassion. Okay, see, now this is where I got a little skeptical when I first read the book. Growing up, I always thought of compassion as kind of a passive thing,
Yeah.
like being nice to people, maybe even a little weak.
Yeah, I can see that. It's easy to misunderstand compassion, to see it as this soft, naive emotion that makes you vulnerable. But what the art of happiness argues, and what a lot of research since then has backed up, is that compassion is actually this incredible source of inner strength. It's not about being a pushover. It's about connecting with others on a deeper level. And that connection, ironically, is where you find a lot of strength.
So it's not just about being nice for the sake of being nice. It's about actually tapping into something much deeper and more powerful.
Exactly. And it's not just about your own inner world either. The book argues that compassion strengthens our relationships too. It creates these bonds built on understanding and empathy, which, let's face it, we could all use a little more of in the world.
Absolutely. And here's where it gets really interesting. The book actually breaks compassion down into two different types. I'd never thought of it that way before, but it makes so much sense.
Right, and this distinction is so important. The first type is what they call attachment-based compassion, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's that compassion we feel for the people we're closest to, family, friends, partners.
Okay, so the love and care you feel for those closest to you, that makes sense.
But here's the catch. The book warns that this type of compassion, as strong as it can easily flip into its opposite.
What do you mean?
Well, think about it. Jealousy, possessiveness, even anger, they can all stem from that same place of deep caring, right? It's like those emotions are just twisted versions of that initial loving feeling.
Kind of like when a passionate romance goes sour, all that intense love can morph into resentment and anger really quickly.
Exactly. It's like that saying, there's a thin line between love and hate. And that's where the second type of compassion comes in. Genuine compassion. This one's less about those intense personal attachments and more about recognizing our shared humanity. It's about seeing the suffering in others, whether it's someone you love, a stranger, or even someone you might consider an enemy, and genuinely wanting to help without needing anything in return.
So it's less about personal attachment and more about this deeper understanding that we're all interconnected, that we all experience joy and pain, and that common ground is where true compassion blossoms.
Exactly. It's recognizing that on a fundamental level, we're all in this thing called life together, which, let's be honest, can be a pretty powerful realization. I mean, I remember when I first really grasped that concept, it was a game changer for me.
I can imagine. It's like that Maya Angelou quote, "We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike." But okay, I have to ask, was there actually any scientific backing for this whole compassion is good for you thing back when the book was written? Or was it more of a philosophical idea at that point?
That's what's so fascinating. Back then, this stuff was barely on science's radar. But now, we have mountains of research showing that compassion is linked to some pretty amazing benefits. Like, we're talking better physical health, stronger immune function, lower risk of heart disease, even a longer lifespan.
Wait, seriously? Compassion can impact your physical health just from being a kinder person.
It really seems that way. Happy people tend to be more compassionate, of much we know. But get this, acting compassionately actually makes us happier. There was this incredible study on Tibetan monks who had spent years meditating on compassion.
Okay, I got to hear about this monk study. What did they find?
Well, researchers at the University of Wisconsin studied their brain activity while they were meditating, and the results were mind-blowing. These monks had unusually high levels of gamma brainwave activity, which is linked to all sorts of good stuff, focus, learning, positive emotions.
So by practicing compassion, they were literally rewiring their brains for happiness.
It seems that way. And it circles back to what we were talking about earlier, the brain's incredible ability to change and react. By intentionally cultivating compassion, we're not just feeling good temporarily, we're training our brains for lasting well-being. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows, right? I mean, life is messy. And one thing the art of happiness doesn't shy away from is the reality of suffering.
That's true. It acknowledges that suffering is a part of life.
Yeah.
It even shares that very moving story about Kisukotami, the woman who loses her child and goes door to door desperately seeking a cure for death.
Oh man, that story is heartbreaking. But it's such a powerful illustration of how we all deal with loss and grief, how universal those experiences are. It's like, no matter who you are, where you come from, what you believe in, we all experience the pain of losing someone we love. And that shared experience, as difficult as it can be, it connects us all.
It's like this reminder that we're not alone in our suffering, that everyone around us is carrying their own burdens. Yeah. And what I find interesting is the book doesn't simply say, well, suffering is inevitable, so just accept it and move on. It actually challenges us to go a step further, to find meaning in our suffering, which is a whole other level.
Totally. And this connects beautifully with a lot of modern therapy, specifically this concept of post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that instead of being crushed by difficult experiences, we can actually use them as fuel for positive transformation. It doesn't mean the pain disappears, but it does mean we can learn and grow from it.
So it's like instead of just getting back to normal after something bad happens, we can actually use that experience to become even stronger and more resilient.
Exactly. It's not about erasing the past, but about using it as a stepping stone for growth. And The Art of Happiness offers a really powerful example of this, the Dalai Lama's own experience of losing his homeland.
Oh, right. He talks about that in the book, doesn't he? Being forced to flee Tibet and everything he knew.
It's incredibly moving. You'd think an experience like that would lead to bitterness and despair, but instead he found a new sense of purpose, new ways to connect with the world, and ultimately a deeper sense of peace.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, that's for sure. But I gotta be honest, sometimes these big, profound ideas can feel a little overwhelming. Like, it's one thing to read about compassion and post-traumatic growth, but how do we actually apply all of this in our own lives, especially with all the everyday stresses and distractions we face?
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day and lose sight of the bigger picture. But the beauty of The Art of Happiness is that it doesn't just leave us with lofty ideas, it gives us practical advice, too. Like, one technique that really resonated with me is the sense of urgency trick.
The sense of urgency trick. Okay, I don't remember that one. Tell me more.
It's actually really simple. Their authors point out that when we're faced with a crisis, like a sudden emergency, we instantly find this incredible motivation to act. Right? We don't procrastinate, we don't overthink it, we just jump into action mode. So they suggest we try to tap into that same sense of urgency when it comes to our own personal growth.
So like, instead of putting off our happiness, telling ourselves, oh, I'll start meditating tomorrow, or I'll be nicer to my partner next week, we treat it with the same urgency as if our well-being depended on it. Because in a way, it kind of does.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our happiness is just as important as anything else on our to-do list, maybe even more so. And then there's the mental combat technique, which is a bit more, shall we say, unconventional.
Unconventional, how so?
Well, instead of trying to suppress negative emotions like anger, the book suggests we actually visualize ourselves battling them directly, almost like a warrior facing down an opponent.
Okay, I gotta admit, that sounds a little out there.
Yeah.
Like, am I supposed to be picturing myself in a karate outfit fighting off a giant angry cloud or something?
I mean, you do you. But you get the idea. It's not about passively letting anger or frustration control you. It's about actively fighting back. And I think there's something really empowering about that imagery, you know?
I do, actually. It's like, instead of being a victim to our emotions, we can actually choose how we respond to them. We have the power to fight for our own happiness.
Yes, and that's what I love about the book. It's not about passive acceptance. It's about actively engaging with our minds and cultivating the qualities that lead to a more fulfilling life. The authors even lay out a clear path for doing this. Learning, conviction, determination, action, effort. It's a journey, not a quick fix, but it's a journey worth taking.
And speaking of journeys, the book also touches on self-esteem, which I think ties into all of this. It talks about this middle way approach, right?
It does, and it's such an important concept because a lot of us get caught in these extremes, you know? Either we're overly confident, bordering on arrogant, or we're constantly putting ourselves down. But the middle way is about finding that sweet spot between the two, not arrogance, but genuine confidence rooted in honest self-awareness.
So not denying our strengths, but also not being afraid to acknowledge our weaknesses.
Exactly. It's about accepting ourselves for who we are, flaws and all, and recognizing that our worthiness isn't dependent on being perfect. And this actually leads to one of the most thought-provoking ideas in the book, this concept of basic spirituality.
Basic spirituality. Okay, now that's interesting. What do they even mean by that?
Well, the authors argue that even if we're not religious, we all have this innate need to connect with something larger than ourselves, to find meaning and purpose beyond the day-to-day grind. And that's what basic spirituality is all about, cultivating those core human qualities like kindness, compassion, gratitude, forgiveness, and recognizing our interconnectedness with all things. It's about realizing that our actions have ripple effects and that even small acts of kindness can make a big difference in the world.
It's about remembering that we're all in this together, and in that connection, we can find incredible strength and support. And maybe, just maybe, that's the key to unlocking true, lasting happiness.
Beautifully said. And you know, as we wrap up our deep dive into The Art of Happiness, that's the message I keep coming back to. It's not about achieving some perfect state of bliss. It's about showing up each day and making the effort to cultivate more joy, more kindness, and more compassion, both for ourselves and for the world around us. It's a lifelong journey, but it's a journey worth taking one step at a time.
So there you have it. The Art of Happiness, Ancient Wisdom, Modern Research, and a timeless message of hope. We hope this deep dive has given you not just food for thought, but also some practical tools and inspiration to cultivate more happiness in your own life. Because as the Dalai Lama himself reminds us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. What will yours be?